Okay, we are live here with Cyprian, also known as Vin Armani. And actually, the last time Cyprian was on the show, we kind of got into a little bit on the backstory on his name change, which I think was pretty interesting. So, if you
Yes.
want to go back and check that out, that was episode 305, I think. So, I guess almost a little over a year ago is when we last spoke. So, good to have you back, Cyprian.
Hey, great to be back.
Yeah, and I mean, last time we talked, I remember I can kind of almost transport myself back to it. It was during the obviously the in the height of the COVID vaccine madness when people were losing their jobs, and I had a threat with my employer that that I might be, they might try to force me to get vaccinated, which I then would have left my job. And I think I ended up titling that show "Finding Your Fighting Position."
Mhm.
And as you've talked about a lot, the need to position yourself geographically, but also in other ways, in a way that you're able to fight. And I think it's interesting, as things have obviously changed a lot in the last year, but as we look at what happened, and things kind of flipped like a switch from COVID to the Ukraine, and now we find ourselves many months later into this Ukraine war, and it's coming out that now the president of the Ukraine, or of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is, I believe it's just a proposal right now, but I think it's assumed it's going to go into effect,
Mhm.
to ban Russian Orthodoxy.
Mhm.
It's insane to even say that out loud, to hear it. But let me just first get your thoughts on when you saw that proposal, when you saw that was going to happen. What were your thoughts?
Um, it was not surprise. So certainly in the circle of people that I am around, the my spiritual father, Father Turbo Qualls, the conversations that we've had both privately and publicly, the last 3 years, much of the church has understood the last 3 years to be fundamentally an attack on the church, as all manifestations of Antichrist have been forever. And so this has been seen as a manifestation of Antichrist. Um, I think that there's a very interesting and notable thing here, that it does seem that why does everything always end up with let's close the churches? Why does everything
Hmm.
always end up with the churches need to be closed?
That was
Right?
the first thing with COVID. Close the churches. We got to
Close
close
the
the
churches.
churches. Yeah.
And I think that this is very much a like eyes to see, ears to hear sort of situation, where it's like, mm, I guarantee you that the solution for the climate change thing is also going to be close to churches. I can guarantee you.
Ooh.
I can guarantee you. Because at the end of the day, all of that is just noise. That the struggle is what the struggle has always been, what it's
Hmm.
always been. And so, and I think that seeing that and understanding that, and really being presented in a very visceral way, where you're just like, how long are you going to deny that this is about the church? How long are you going to deny what the real struggle is? Like, how many times? You know what I mean? Because
Hmm.
and I think that that in and of itself has been a huge catalyst for a great many people who have not been otherwise religious
Hmm.
for most of their life, to within the last 3 years become not only religious, but for the most part, what I've seen is a move toward traditional Christianity in the West. So whether that's sort of traditional Roman Catholicism and returning to those kinds of roots, or I think even more pronounced, because it's like it seems like it came out of nowhere, a move toward Orthodoxy, Eastern
Hmm.
Orthodoxy in particular. And yeah, the so I think that we can get into a little bit about talking about the context of this, of what Zelensky is doing and what it means. But if I can paint in some pretty broad strokes about like kind of historical context, little bit of theological context. But I mean, to start this out, what I do want to say as I start to talk about this, because I am Orthodox. I was brought into the Serbian Orthodox Church, however, and Serbia right now, in terms of all of the parties there, is still kind of cool with everybody. So it's a view from the outside in. It's kind of like you're talking about somebody else's family in this case. So this is definitely this is a family issue that's taking place. It's a big issue that stretches back for centuries. I don't speak Russian. I'm not a scholar of either Russian history, nor am I a scholar of the church. So I can paint with some pretty broad brushes, with a pretty broad brush. People, please forgive me if I get certain small details wrong as we talk about this. I want to say that up front. I'm going to try to stay away from really getting into kind of the theological stuff, because that's out of my wheelhouse, right? I don't want to get above my skis, but I think that we can have a productive discussion and give some people at least a basis to start to understand how important this is.
Yeah.
Like this is it's the most important development that has happened in the Ukraine war. By far. There's nothing more important that has happened.
It's an attack on the ancient faith, right? And just to paint, and you're painting with a broad, you're going to paint with a broad brush. I'm going to paint with an even broader brush, because I know even less about it. But I don't know how familiar people are with the different faiths, the different religions in Ukraine, and I really wasn't until I started researching a little bit. But almost 70% of people in Ukraine identify as Eastern Orthodox of some type. I think the numbers I have here, roughly 28% are the Kiev Patriarchate, and I think there's a large group, almost a quarter, that simply identifies as Orthodox. Probably for different reasons. I'm sure there's some different reasons for that. Maybe not wanting to get lumped in with one group or the other. There's 12.8% that identify with the Moscow Patriarchate. So this is big. I mean, to put this in perspective, you're talking about 12% of the population. And that's not even taking into account for those who are just identifying as Orthodox. That's tantamount in the United States to, outline Catholicism. I mean, it's close,
bigger,
right?
No, it's far larger than that. It's far bigger. So first let's just lay out a few sort of things about this, because I think for us in the West, we can have a misunderstanding when we look at these things about, different religions, even as you said. So the first thing to understand is these are all the same religion.
All Christianity.
No. All the same religion. Right. So like if we were talking about, these are all the same religion. In other words, if you're baptized in one of these by a priest who associates with one of these, all of the rest recognize that baptism as valid. They recognize your chrismation as valid. They are part of the same church, right? So the church, they are all a part of the same church. This is the exact same, it's the same religion. What we're really talking about is we are talking about jurisdictions. Okay. So the better way to really view this is like in the Catholic Church, you would have the Archdiocese of Orange County in California, and you would have the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Okay. So when we talk about the Kiev Patriarchate and we talk about the Moscow Patriarchate, we're talking about it's a level higher than diocese, but we're talking about jurisdictions. Okay. And so a lot of this a lot of it has to do with the fact that the church does operate in the world, right? So there are physical buildings that need to be taken care of. There are salaries that need to be paid. There are monasteries that need to be kept up. There are faithful that need to be helped, social programs. You have to operate in the world, so you have to have some institution within the world, right? And that's necessarily going to be a political institution, especially in the Orthodox world. So the other thing to understand, and I think that this is to give some historical context, is you cannot separate Russia and certainly Ukraine from the church. Like, to the degree that the alphabet that is used, right? The Russian alphabet, the letters, it's called the Cyrillic alphabet. So that's named after Saint Cyril, who actually introduced the alphabet and the language of Church Slavonic. So Church Slavonic introduced that to the Rus people. So, like, you can't separate out, like, Holy Russia. Basically, there's been Orthodoxy in Russia since the 900s, so for over 1,000 years. The church coming in is the identity of Russia. Before that, basically the Mongols were in there. They were kind of subservient to the Mongols. There was some influence of Scandinavian, Slavic, and it was a hodgepodge of, various different warring kind of tribes trying to each take their little section. And it was all taking place in Ukraine. And it was through the church and the introduction of the church that the Russian people at the time, called the Kievan Rus, so Kievan by Kiev. Kiev was the capital of Russia. It's the ancient capital of Russia. It was from there, and it was the church that gives or gave Russia, still gives to this day. I mean, Vladimir Putin talks about it. It is the church that gives the Russian people a cohesive identity. So that's the first thing to understand, is that you cannot separate Russia from the church.
Let's focus on that for a minute. So it gives them a cohesive identity. What do you mean by that?
There is no Russian people outside of the church. There is no Russian people outside of the church. Before the church, there was the area that we call Russia, there was no Russian people. They did not have an identity where they saw themselves as in any way connected to each other. It was various tribes, nations, small nations and tribes, right? In all of these districts that saw themselves with different ethnicities that had different languages. So like I say, it's even the Church Slavonic that as a language gives them a common language. This is the first time the Russians have a common language even. Before that, there's no common language in all of that area. And that's introduced by Saint Cyril. So that it is the church. You cannot separate Russian identity from the church. It's impossible. Right? And that's not the year 9, that's in the 900s that happens. But even deeper than that, when we talk about Ukraine, so that people can, that's the first thing to understand, right? So now you're seeing a war that's taking place in this region. That's a war between brothers, right? Kiev is the, what will we say, the seat of the beginning of Russian identity as it's understood now, today. Begins in Kiev, right? So this region is incredibly important to a people. Like, who is in control of this region and its connection to the church is incredibly important to the whole identity of the people. It's the equivalent of the Jews in Israel. It's that deep. It is that deep. Right? So it's not, so you can't separate this. There are, in terms of the Orthodox world, and this is Greek Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Antiochians, right? Even the ones in the Middle East, even the Palestinians, who are Orthodox, because there's plenty of Orthodoxy there. Every day we commemorate saints, ancient saints from Ukraine. So today, as we're recording this for you, and yesterday for me was Pope Clement of Rome. So Saint Clement of Rome, who was, it's arguable whether he was the first pope, the first pope after Peter in Rome, or whether he was the fourth. So basically, Peter was there. He ordained 2 other bishops of Rome, but Peter was still alive. But the person that Peter passed the church to wholly, as he would sit in the seat of Peter when Peter was not there, was Clement. Now Clement, and he's considered to be, he's called one of the apostolic fathers. So he's considered to be one of these first fathers of the church who was incredibly influential, who actually knew the apostles and studied under them. So like we would call, what you would call like the first generation. Okay. So he's the spiritual son. Pope Clement is the spiritual son of Peter. So this is Peter's star student. Okay. He passes off to him in Rome. He says, okay, my martyrdom is on its way. You will be the Bishop of Rome, Pope, Papa, right? Chief among equals. Now we're still in the Roman times. Clement obviously falls afoul of, he's a martyr as well. He falls afoul of the Roman emperor, and he's sent to Crimea, the Kherson, ancient Kherson. And he's put to hard labor. This is in the year like 199, 100. So he's sent over there. He's put to hard labor. There's a story in his. So this is today commemorated, by the way. So in any Orthodox church where you are right now, if you go right now, this is the saint who will be commemorated today. So understand this: besides Peter, the next guy, the first pope, was martyred in Crimea.
That's remarkable. Wow.
In the year 100. So he's put there. So the story in his life is that he's put to hard labor. There's no fresh water around. There's other prisoners there. He's obviously a holy individual. He prays, and a small lamb shows up out of nowhere, just like pops. And there's just a little lamb, and the lamb takes off, and he follows the lamb up onto a hill, and the lamb vanishes. And he goes up onto the hill, and he's been breaking rocks. That's what he was put to hard labor, breaking rocks in a quarry. And he takes his pickaxe and he hits the ground, and a spring of fresh water comes up. And everybody drinks from the water, and he converts like right there, like everybody basically in the prison is converted. Like he converts them all. He baptizes them and converts them. And for that, they say, okay, execution. They execute him by tying an anchor to his neck and throwing him into the ocean, there into the Black Sea, where this fight is taking place. He's martyred in those waters. And the people pray that they could see him again. And for centuries, ever so often, the tide would recede and his relics would be there, and there would be basically a heavenly built shrine in the sea after it, and they could see him, and then and there were many miracles that happened and all of that. So the first thing to understand is that it's like, that's how long Christianity in a mystical sense has been in that region from the beginning. It is Christian holy. Yeah. It is Christian holy land. It is Christian holy land. There are people who are there. Their blood is there, who were baptized by Clement, who were baptized by Peter's top student. Right? So this is what you have to understand, that for Christians, this is so important. And the fact that, so now when you look at there's a non-Orthodox, non-Christian leader who is doing the bidding of basically atheist materialists, right? Wanting to change this and make it something different. And so now I think people could start to understand, when Russians like Dmitry Medvedev, Vladimir Putin say it's Satanism, this is a war against Christ. you can start to get a context of like, oh, this is not just let me put a Ukraine flag emoji in my bio. Like, this is important to Christians. The other thing that's very important to understand is that Eastern Orthodoxy, so all of the Orthodox people who are in Ukraine and all Russians, Rome considers them all members of the body of Christ. So Eastern Orthodoxy is a true church for Roman Catholics. So if you ban any of those churches that are there, you are banning the true church even by the canon. It's the canon. Even by the canons of Rome, you are banning the body of Christ. You are making it illegal. So this is a big deal for Roman Catholics.
Is this? I mean, I'm sure this has happened somewhere with the church being banned.
Well, let's talk about it, right? Because that's that's the most important historical context of what we've got going on here.
Let's get into that.
Okay. Because this is where I'm going to go with broad brushes, because this is so complex and sort of twisting. Okay. If people want like the introduction to this is the first book that when I became Orthodox, my godfather, or maybe even before, told me to get. It's called Chosen for His People. Chosen for His People. Yeah. It's a biography of Patriarch Tikhon. It's written by Jane Swan. Patriarch Tikhon, so we'll kind of start in the middle of the story. Patriarch Tikhon, Saint Tikhon, was the last patriarch of Moscow before, or let's say he was the last what we would call real patriarch of Moscow before the Soviets basically took complete control of the church. So what is a patriarch? Right. So that's important to understand, because like you were talking about Moscow Patriarchate, Kiev Patriarchate. If we talk about what we've got going on in Ukraine right now, there's and so let's maybe start there. Let's start where we are and we can work our way backwards. There's fundamentally three jurisdictions in Ukraine right now. So there is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate is what it's called. There is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev Patriarchate. And then there is the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Okay. So the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is considered by many in the Orthodox world to be basically a schismatic heretic church. However, yes. However, that is the church that is recognized by what's called the ecumenical patriarch. So let's talk about what a patriarch is, basically. So there's no pope, and there's no infallibility or anything like that in Orthodoxy. That's not believed in. That's a completely Roman Catholic thing. What you have is the holy orders. So you have deacons and subdeacons and readers, and then you have priests who can actually perform the liturgy and all of the sacraments, and then you have bishops who ordain priests. You have a level
in the Orthodox Church. Can priests get married in the Orthodox Church?
Yes,
no?
Yes,
they can.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
And not an important question. I was just curious.
Yeah, priests could always be married in Christianity. That's a Roman, a later Roman Catholic innovation, basically, of stopping priests from being married. So, so you've got priests, then you've got bishops. Now, in terms of the marriage thing, usually once we get above priest, in general, the people in those ranks, the men in those ranks, are pulled from monastics. So in general, there's a strong monastic tradition in Orthodoxy, something that's really not there in Catholicism anymore, but certainly used to be in Roman Catholicism. So generally you'll pull from monastics. Monastics cannot be married. So these are monks. So these are generally, once we get at this level, these individuals are not married. So you have bishops, then you have archbishops and what's called metropolitans, which is a kind of jurisdictional over a large area. And then you have patriarchs who are you might say over a nation or over a people. So a country will have a patriarch. There's a Serbian patriarch. There's a Romanian patriarch. The patriarch of Moscow is called the Patriarch of Moscow and all Rus. So Rus is the people, right? So it's the metropolitan is kind of about an area. So a metropolitan will be about a city, a region, but the patriarch is about a people group. So you've got a Greek patriarch, you've got a Serbian patriarch, you've got a Russian patriarch, etc. And then you have the most ancient sort of position, which is called the ecumenical patriarch, and he is basically viewed as as a chief among equals of all the patriarchs.
So not like in the Roman Catholic Church where the Pope would be above at the same level as the patriarchs, but over the entire church.
So he's not over anybody, right? He's the chief among equals. So he's kind of like the Speaker of the House.
Okay.
Right? You could say, right? So it's not like the Speaker of the House doesn't get, has power because they're viewed as a leader, but they still have the same, they're still vested with the same general authority as any other congressman, right? It's not like they get some special constitutional authority just because they're the speaker. There's some minor things, right, that are like logistical about like succession, if people die and whatnot, that they're sort of in line. I'm saying in the Speaker of the House sort of situation, and that's kind of similar with the way that it is with patriarchs. So these are basically leaders, but the church, there have been various times when patriarchs do not agree with the decisions, many times political decisions that are made by other patriarchs. And so they fundamentally break what they would call breaking communion. It's not a true schism. It's not like we've become a new religion, but they're basically, in terms of there are some liturgical, and this is where I'm not going to get over my skis, right? Because this is deep church matters here. But needless to say that it's like it isn't the same as the schism that happened between the East and the West with Rome and Constantinople, where both of the sort of popes or patriarchs excommunicated each other, right? So these are not patriarchs excommunicating each other. So basically what's happened in Ukraine, and this began in the 90s, was the Ukrainian, some would say that this really began in the 20s, and we can talk about this, but since the 90s, since the fall of the Soviet Union, it was very clear, the Russian church, that was very clear. It's there. Ukraine being its own entity, there's a desire for a Ukrainian church, right? Where they say we're a Ukrainian people. As a people, we should have a patriarch. There certainly is some validity to that in terms of the tradition of the church. And there's been a move that has been supported by basically like the Greek side of things to recognize a patriarch from Ukraine. On the Slavic side of things, they basically said, culturally, religiously, we're basically still going to see you as part of Russia. Like, you've been a part of Russia for a long, long time. So we're basically going to see you as part of Russia. And a lot of this is the fault of the Bolsheviks.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, as you said earlier, that the Russian Orthodox are looking at Kyiv, which is, Ukraine, as sort of the birthplace, I guess, for lack of a better term, of their religion. So to have the people, of the people, of their identity.
Yeah, exactly.
So to see, so you can kind of see how this play out a little bit, where if they're looking to break away and form a new identity,
and not just a new identity, right? But a new identity that is not Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And that is antithetical to Russia. Right? So so you imagine this would be like, okay, it's the Palestinians in Israel, right? Not only are we going to take over Palestine, but we're going to take over Palestine and be hostile to the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
clearly this is something that Jews are like, what? Can't do it. Not going to happen. Impossible. Cannot allow it to occur. Sorry. And if you understand the conflict in Ukraine that way, if you have the historical context, you're like, oh, well, yeah, of course. What did it? Of course. Like, yeah, there's absolutely no way. There's no way. And so this has been, this is what the West is playing with. The West has basically engaged Ukraine in a holy war. Because it is not at the level of, oh, we want some territory. This isn't about territory, right? The idea that Ukraine says, you got to give back Crimea. You got to give back Crimea to this atheist, non-Orthodox government. And it's like, St. Clement was martyred right there. What are you talking about? No, you're not having this back. No, absolutely not. I can't let you have it back. Or it's not even have it back. I can't give it to you. It's not mine to give. It's mine to protect. Right? And of course, look, not everybody involved on the Russian side it's not like a lot of people are using that as an excuse, right? There's political aspects of this, of course. Not everybody is just so pious. And of course, but you can see that it's like, to ignore that part of the story would be like ignoring the religious aspect of the conflict in Israel between the Israelis and the Palestinians. How can you?
Yeah, it's the whole story.
It's the whole story. It's the whole story. So, what's happened? So let's go back a little bit to talk about like how it gets to this point. So first off, let's talk about what's being proposed to be banned. What's being proposed to be banned is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate. So this is the set of bishops and everybody below the bishops who are answering to the metropolitans and patriarchs who are in the order of the Moscow Patriarchate. They actually have the most bishops in Ukraine. They have the most churches in Ukraine, and they have the most monasteries in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is chock full of monasteries. Some of them 1,000 years old. Some of them that go back to the very beginning of, as we said, the founding of the beginning of the Russian people. Probably the most important is the Kiev Caves Monastery. And there are so many saints. Almost every day you go through, the Synaxarion, which is like the listing of saints that are and their lives that are going to be commemorated on a given day, and you'll find a saint from the Kiev Caves. So at one time, the monastery itself was like the size of a city. It's the spiritual. It's really the spiritual hub of. In many ways, it could be argued that it's almost it's the spiritual hub of Russian Orthodoxy. That may be taking it too far. Somebody could correct me there, but I think there are probably people who could argue with that, right? The hub of Orthodoxy is obviously Mount Athos, and there's a giant Russian monastery that's there on Mount Athos in Greece. That has been raided by this Ukrainian regime pretty constantly since 2014, on and off. Recently, they've arrested or detained monks and priests, correct? That's right. They have been doing that. They've been saying that they are, colluding with the enemy, which we'll see that this is a pattern. And there's a reason why Russians will be. This is a pattern that Russians will recognize, and another reason why they're not going to back down. The more this goes, it's the reason why it's a huge escalation. So what Zelensky is setting up to ban is he's setting up to ban basically that institution. And what that will probably mean is that the churches, the property, all of that is going to be taken and given to what is called the Ukrainian, is called the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So this Orthodox Church of Ukraine,
which the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, as you said before, is only recognized, maybe not only, but is recognized by the Greek Orthodox, but not by Russian Orthodox. Is that?
Yes. So not the Slavic Orthodox, right? So it's recognized by basically Greece and down. So you have, like Antiochian, which is Syria. You have the people in Turkey, etc. So like sort of the Greek speaking. That's maybe a good way to put it.
Okay.
Right. So the Greeks, the churches where there would be Greek services in Greek as opposed to services in Church Slavonic, so which is the Slavic portion of Orthodoxy. So you have two major sort of hubs of Orthodoxy: the Greek world and the Slavic world. This is Orthodoxy there. So yes, that church is recognized by basically the Greek world, which is the West. Right. So that Greek world is associated with the West, NATO countries, EU countries, etc. So there's this political aspect. In 2018, there was a synod that was called. Bishops came together, and bishops from the Kiev Patriarchate of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is really like not kind of recognized. It's not recognized by anybody, but they do have some churches and some monasteries. And then some from the Moscow Patriarchate, and then some of these other ones said, okay, we're going to be this church. And this is going to be our jurisdiction. We're going to have jurisdiction over Ukraine. We're going to have a patriarch, and the ecumenical patriarch recognized them. Because of that, the Russian patriarch and the ecumenical patriarch stopped communion with each other. Which basically means that during services, if a patriarch is giving services, there's a point where he does his commemorations, and he will say all of the other patriarchs' names. And they've stopped saying each other's names, so they stop recognizing them.
Wow.
Jurisdictionally, right? So this is it's like it has a deep liturgical and kind of spiritual meaning that this is happening, but it's also not like permanent necessarily. This is how the church works. The church is old, right? This is the ancient church. It's decentralized. Okay, so those people who are into decentralization know that like this is how it works. When nobody's over anybody else, and you have a disagreement about what's going on, this is what happens. So most interestingly about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate is when Russia did their invasion of Ukraine. That church actually that jurisdiction broke communion with the Moscow Patriarchate, which is kind of weird. It's still being called Moscow Patriarchate, but they've been sort of flying without a patriarch for since the invasion, right? Because they're Ukrainians. So they were like, we don't agree with your stand, because the Patriarch of Moscow has been very supportive of the military action.
Right.
Right. And so the Metropolitan and everybody underneath were like, no, we're going to cease to recognize sort of your authority in this case. This is our protest. But yet, even though they have sort of not rejected fully, but that they have, nominally broken communion with the Moscow Patriarchate, they are still by the government of Ukraine. So they took a pro-Ukraine stance. But the government of Ukraine is going to ban them. Right?
So it's just remarkable. And kind of, as you've laid this out, these different jurisdictions, it'll be interesting to see if this ban does happen, how, the other jurisdictions react.
Let's talk about it. We have some historical precedent.
Okay.
Right? So that's what's important about this book. So in the year, from the year 1721, Russia did not have a patriarch. From 1721 to 1917, Russia didn't have a patriarch. Peter the Great wanted to westernize and modernize Russia. And as part of that, he basically removed the patriarch and started the most holy synod. And so basically what he did was he just took metropolitans, the highest metropolitans, and they were all in a council, and then he's the Tsar. And this carried on for 2 centuries. Within that council, you had the Metropolitan of Russia, the Metropolitan of Kiev, Novgorod, St. Petersburg, Georgia, they call him the Exarch. So you had all of these different metropolitans, including Kiev and Moscow, were from 1721 until 1917, Kiev's metropolitan and Moscow's metropolitan were equal in the council to the Tsar with the St. Petersburg metropolitan and all of that. Okay, so all one church. Just metropolitan, jurisdictions that are different.
Right.
And all sort of advising, the Tsar. So whether this was a good decision or not, basically what happened was when the Tsar was deposed in 1917, and when the Bolsheviks came into power, the Synod came together for Russia, and they said, we have to reestablish the Patriarchate. We have to reestablish the Moscow Patriarchate because we have no more Tsar. And the church is going to need protection because these are atheists that are coming into power right now. So we must, and they are vehemently anti-church, right? Marx, religion is the opiate of the masses. So they're like, we're in danger. Okay, so it's not going to cut it to just have the synod. So Patriarch Tikhon was chosen. He was actually in America at the time, and he was brought back. Very holy man, monastic, was brought back to act as the defender of the Rus people, basically the defender of the church and the defender of the identity of Russians. And he tried, he fought. At the same time that this is going on, that they reestablished the Patriarchate of Moscow down in Ukraine. Now Ukraine is fighting for independence because, well, Holy Russia is breaking apart. Eventually, of course, they fall within the Soviet socialist republics, but there's a power vacuum about what are we? Are we independent? And at the same time, this is when we first see the Orthodox Church of Ukraine come up, that they say, well, okay, we need to have our own. Moscow just got their patriarch. We need somebody to defend us. So we're going to have our own patriarch as well. Now, what happens, Patriarch Tikhon is fundamentally martyred. A new patriarch is put in by the Bolsheviks, Sergius, who is viewed basically as a villain in the church, who pledges basically fealty to the Bolsheviks.
The Bolsheviks were able to put in a patriarch?
That's right. Well, if you read about what they did between 1917 and 1921 or 1925, we talk about the Holocaust. The real, if you want to talk about a 20th century Holocaust, 100 million Christians killed by the Bolsheviks, 100,000 clergy executed, 100,000 clergy executed. The stories of the ways that they were tortured and killed is difficult, heart-wrenching to even read about. It's considered a period of, they're called the New Martyrs. And pretty much in the Orthodox Church, we commemorate them pretty much every day. There's new martyrs that are commemorated because there were just so many of them. These are saints. These are saints of the Orthodox Church. Yes, they took over the church. Sergius, they put him in, and what he said, I think, and who knows what he was motivated by. I think there's a lot of history, and people in the church can debate over this. He said, I'm going to try to save the church here. I'm going to try to cut a deal with the Bolsheviks, and I'm going to try to save the church. That basically meant a lot of. So there was a break. A lot of people said, we're not going to do this. A lot of priests said, I'm not going to do this. I'm willing to die. Many of them did. Many went into what they called the catacombs, practicing in secret. for like almost 100 years. That was the case of the Russian church also leaving. Many fled as refugees, and that's why Russian Orthodoxy spread to the world. It's why one of the reasons why it's in the U.S. now, that we have a Russian Orthodox church outside of Russia, was because the Bolsheviks did what they did. So Ukraine tried to establish this church. Now, unfortunately, by 1938, when Stalin did his the Great Terror or the Great Purge, 1937. That was the end of basically the Orthodox Church anywhere in the Soviet Union. So much clergy was killed or imprisoned. The churches were destroyed. And so there was fundamentally no real church to speak of in the Soviet Union from 1938, besides the catacomb church, kind of the hidden church, between 1938 and, the 1990s. And the church was reconstituted in the 1990s. Now, of course, there was still a succession of patriarchs and bishops. There were still priests being ordained. There were still baptisms happening, but this is happening in a very underground way. So the Ukrainian Orthodox, or the Ukrainian Orthodox, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. It's hard to keep these in line. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine that was established in 1921, sort of as a response to the Bolsheviks, to the fall of Holy Russia. By 1938, that was basically destroyed. Now, the current church that is recognized by the Constantinople Patriarchate, they say that they are that. They say that they are the extension of that church, of that jurisdiction. Okay. Now, whether that's true or, again, like, I don't. That's people can draw the lines of apostolic succession and the whole nine. And perhaps they must have some claim to that. However, this period, it's important to understand that, like, in the entire Orthodox world, this is viewed, the Soviets are viewed as Antichrist. It's really viewed as an end of days scenario, where the church was persecuted at the level of the revelation of St. John. If you're there at that time and you're seeing just priests being literally lined up, and they're like, sign for they line up 50 priests, sign saying that you are in that you are with Sergius and the church that we've approved. I will not sign. Boom. Sign. I will not sign. Boom. In a line like this. Imagine being number 40. This is we don't know about this in the West. We know all about the Holocaust of the Jews. Yeah. We know nothing about this. 100 million Christians. 100 million Christians.
It's unfathomable. I mean, that's mind-blowing.
So when Russians see, so now you take it to be like, okay, that's the history of the people. So when you're a Russian, right, and you look and you see an atheist government pushing this woke, which is drawn from out of Marxism, cultural Marxism, and you see that government trying to take over the Holy Land fundamentally, you're going to have a certain reaction. And then when you see them say, oh, we're about to ban, that's exactly what the Bolsheviks did. We're about to ban the church. The same church that the Bolsheviks banned. The Moscow Patriarchate. You're like, oh, I know who you are. Hello again. So it's time for us to do battle again. Okay, maybe we'll do it a little differently this time.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it when it happened, when the Bolsheviks did it, and terrible tragedy, as you outlined, 100 million Christians dying. But it's interesting how God works in that was a catalyst, right?
Yep.
For
yep.
Orthodoxy spreading to the United States and across the world. So, I mean, it's none of us know how this is going to work out or what will happen. but you've kind of got a reputation for making predictions and being pretty accurate for predicting how things will play out. How do you see this playing out? I mean,
it will. There's no doubt that God will use this, and that God is using it. I think the first thing is, this is brother on brother. This is Orthodox killing Orthodox. And that's the most important thing, I think, to understand, is that there's nothing that the enemy would love more than Orthodox killing Orthodox. There's nothing that the enemy would love more than Christians killing Christians. And I mean, it's I guess it's one thing to be like, oh, well, this is, that happened in Constantinople, and there was, Latins killing Greeks, Orthodox killing Roman Catholics. And it's like, yeah, but these are literally the same church. And like, these are people who, for all of them, this is a holy place. I think, in these scenarios, the church, this is when the church shines. This is when saints are made. It's in these scenarios that martyr in Greek, martyr means witness. Mm-hmm. That's what it means. It doesn't mean you were killed. Generally martyrs are killed because that is the ultimate witness. That is proof of them bearing witness that Christ is king. But this is the opportunity. So I think that the true battle is being fought, is about to be fought. I think the true battle is about to be fought, and it's the church doing what she does. Like, it's the church fighting the battle in the way that she fights the battle. And the veil, I think the veil is it's a revelation. The veil is being ripped off. The positive. So what is my prediction? My prediction is that finally the West has an opportunity, and this is the catalyst whereby the West can understand what Christianity actually is and the history of Christianity. Like, because you can't tell the story of Christianity without telling the story of the saints of that region. Because, like I say, there have been saints there since the 1st century. Major saints martyred. Like, this is so how can you be a Christian and not know this?
Yeah,
even
generation saints. Yeah.
First generation. The first pope besides Peter was martyred there, where this battle is taking place. And not only was he martyred, but converted and baptized. Hundreds of people there. It's not like they left. That's the blood of the people dying on that battlefield. Right? So it's like, as Christians, and this is a Christian history that all Christians share. Right? This is the history that we all share. And so it's like, it matters. If you're a Christian, this matters.
And how many Christian churches, in the United States, no matter what denomination, are even going to be talking about this, this
That's
Sunday? Probably almost none.
And that's the key. So that's the enemy winning. This is the real battle. The real battle, because I think we want to understand ourselves as Christians. And I also think that there's one of the positive things that I see happening within, let's say, the libertarian community, is that there is a strong, and it's not just the libertarian community, but it's even happening with the stuff with Ye and Nick Fuentes, right? There is an impulse, because our identity, this materialist and identity since the Enlightenment it's failed us, right? We did a grand experiment as humanity, and over the last 3 years, we see that failed. Big time.
Yeah.
So the experiment should be over. Okay, so what is the foundation that we have to sit on? And so if our identity is going to be, if our first and foremost identity, which it should be, is Christians, right? Like that has worked. It's worked in East and West. It's worked everywhere that it's ever been tried. It's worked. Unlike communism that has failed everywhere it's been tried, Christianity has worked everywhere it's been tried. Never failed.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do that, if we're going to be Christians, like we need to recognize, like, this, what's happening there is part of our history as our spiritual lineage as Christians. It's not just political. In fact, it's not political. If you really understand it, you'll understand it's not political at all. This entire thing is spiritual, and anything that's political is drawn from the spiritual.
Yeah, it goes back to the beginning. I mean, you know, God gave us free will. And if you take that, I mean, if you really trace that back and break it down, that's why evil exists. And we have free will to choose between the two. And a lot of people will point fingers at Christians, at God, and say, well, how can there be a loving God if this terrible thing can happen? And, that kind of gets into, and, we don't have to get too much into what Kanye has said, because I think it's so nuanced that it's hard to even address it, because somebody will take you out of context. But, I don't know what's on Kanye's heart or what's in his mind or what he's thinking. But the point that I got from him was really that no matter how much someone is influenced by that evil, no matter the atrocities they commit, God still loves them, right? And that's very difficult to understand. It's not easy to understand. It's hard for me to understand.
I think that certainly the best way for me to that I've understood it is, and something that I recommend to everyone, is read the lives of the saints every day. So nothing has been more. I mean, you understand where the West went wrong as soon as you read the lives of the saints every day, and it's also been very eye-opening to me, because over and over, I mean, literally every day in the lives of the saints. And so, what are we talking about? I mean, we're talking about. Well, I mean, we just named one who's commemorated today, so it's like literally from then until there have been saints that are canonized within the last 10 years. So, I mean, there's an unbroken tradition. It's the ancient faith, yes, but like it's also the modern faith. It's like it's one unbroken tradition. And what you see over and over and over again is you see, especially in the persecutions in like the 4th century, if you want to change the government, and you're like, we need to have a Christian government, right? We need to have a Christian government. Over and over and over, the saints changed the government. But it's like, how do they change the government? Did they start a political movement? No. Do they rally the people in rebellion? No. Do they get arms? No. What do? They bear witness. They say, they bring this person in, could just be a lay person, right? They bring this lay person in, some woman, right? And they say, worship the gods, worship our pagan gods. No, I will not. Worship our pagan gods. Do it. You have to do it. It's the law. Sound familiar? Last 3 years? No, I will not. No, I will not. I refuse. Okay, then prison for you. Okay, then prison and I pray. Then torture for you. Okay, tortured. Right? And then, okay, you're done torturing. Now, I will not. Okay, so you're going to be executed. And it's in the prison, it's in the torture, it's in the execution, and it's in them saying, I will not, because Jesus Christ is real. And I have a real relationship with this person, and he is the king. That because they do that, emperors, governors have been have been converted. They execute the person, and they're like, whoa, they went through all of that. Everything I could throw at them, they went through all. Oh, this Jesus Christ must actually be real, because I wouldn't do that for the pagan gods.
Man, that is such an incredible point. And I mean, I just had a conversation. I'm not going to say anybody's name. I've had 50 conversations like this where you talk to someone on Facebook about Christianity, about religion, and they'll come back and say, well, it's just not provable. Ultimately, it's just an opinion. But you hit the nail on the head there, man. I mean, when you experience a relationship with Jesus Christ and you see it happen right in front of you, you see changes happen in your life, you see the way that you act, your desires, those things change. And then when you put that on display for other people to watch, when somebody's up against somebody facing death and they still don't cave, I mean, that's it, man. That's
not only not cave, but it's called we call it the crown of martyrdom. Mm-hmm. It's a crown. It's the greatest. There is no greater thing that you could do with your life than to bear witness to Jesus Christ as King. There's not. Mm-hmm. It's like they go so many times. The saints go thanking the people who have given them the opportunity. Like, thank you for, because if the torturer and the executioner, doesn't repent for what they've done, that's they've damned themselves, right? But it's not to say that they can't, because over and over we see with the saints, they do repent. And in some cases, not only do they repent, convert, but then become saints themselves and are martyred. Right. So we see situations where executioners and torturers, because of the experience that they have of witnessing a martyr, convert themselves and then are tortured and executed themselves, and they themselves become saints.
Look at Paul.
And this has happened for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Well, we can look at one, or like I say, you could go through the dozens every day. That's why reading the lives of the saints is like, if you just read the Bible, the Acts of the Apostles, and that's all you know, it's like, wow, that's wonderful. Those were those people then. But then when you're like, 1927 under the Bolsheviks, behaved the same way in that situation as someone under the persecution of Diocletian. And you go, wait a minute. I have not just an icon of this person, I have their photo. Mm-hmm. And it's like, this is an unbroken chain. It has never stopped. It's never stopped. And the battle rages on. It clearly it will never stop, because we're about to see the same thing in Ukraine.
Yeah, and that's kind of the one thing where, I don't know if you have more time to go, a few more minutes here.
I do, sure. Yeah, let's go.
You'll hear Christians say, with everything happening with woke culture and 5-year-olds being taken to drag shows by their parents and all these different things happening, say, well, the end of days must be coming. It must be the end of days soon. And this isn't the first time this type of stuff has happened. This has happened all throughout history, right? Mm-hmm. So
as a matter of fact, it's tame. What's happening now is tame. Mm-hmm. But see, people don't know Christian history. This is one of the biggest problems with sola scriptura, right? This is one of the biggest problems with believing that everything stopped at the Bible, right? That's a huge. You're doing yourself a gigantic disservice in that case, because it's like, well, Christianity is something that's lived out. And people have been living it out and dying for it for 2,000 years. And it's like, this is one of the beautiful things about Orthodoxy, is that not only that they are commemorated, right? That the idea is we will remember them. Well, why? Well, you remember them so that when it comes again, you know what you're looking at. Mm-hmm. And you have some historical context and you have some spiritual context. Right. And so much so that in the Slavic world, certainly in the Slavic Orthodox world, reading the lives of the saints is in terms of spiritual practice, for many, and even saints, many saints, modern saints, have said that that's as, if not more important for a layperson than reading scripture.
Wow.
As, if not more important. You know, Saint Nikolai Velimirovich, there's this beautiful, people can look it up. You could probably look up, so Nikolai Velimirovich. If you can't spell that, you could look up Orthodoxy is a Dramatic Mystery. It's absolutely beautiful. He's making a comment, and he says, and he's a modern saint, 20th century saint from Serbia, Saint Nikolai Velimirovich. And he says, many Englishmen comment that the Bible is not regularly read in the home in the Russian Orthodox Church. And he says, this is true. He says, ours is not a book religion. It's not even a learned religion. Ours is a dramatic mystery. He says, the Bible is in the hymns, it's in the chants, it's in the incense. It's in the fasts, it's in the feasts, it's in the everyday interactions of Orthodox Christians with each other. It's in the architecture of the buildings, it's in the icons. It's in the tradition. And that is to say that it's like, it's not dead. It's not dead. It's alive and living. And the battle is alive and it's raging. And so it's like, understand the battle that you're in. Even if you're a Protestant, the ancient saints are yours still. They're still yours. Right? When Martin Luther nailed those 95 theses, he commemorated those saints, those ancient saints. Right? Saint Clement. He commemorated Saint Clement. So it's like, those are yours. There's so much, there's 1,000 years there that even if you're like, everything, the Roman Catholics and stuff, I don't care about any of that. Yeah, but all that before is still yours. It's still yours. Yeah. That's who gave you the book that you've put on the pedestal. That is your thing. The church didn't have that for centuries after the death and resurrection of our Lord. There was no New Testament.
It didn't just appear right after Jesus died. Yeah.
No, when Saint Clement, was martyred and he converted those people, there was no book. He didn't bring a book with him. There was no New Testament. There was no New Testament in the year 100.
Mm-hmm.
The book that you have now didn't exist. Right? But are you a Christian like St. Clement? Are you a Christian like the first Pope of Rome after Peter? He didn't have a book. Mm-hmm. He didn't sit around reading that book. Right? But the tradition. Right? And that's the tradition that extends. And so I think that it's if people want, again, if you want to be Christian, like, figure out what that means. Understand yourself in your spiritual lineage. Right? Understand what happened after that. After the books in that book, there's a lot that happened. The saints didn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't stop. The persecutions didn't stop. The martyrs didn't stop. Whether you're going to venerate them, whether you're going to have icons of them, whether you're even going to call them saints, they were Christians.
Yeah.
And they died for their faith.
For me personally, I grew up Protestant, grew up Presbyterian, and I'm non-denominational Christian now. But yeah, it is really, fascinating that, my whole journey, learning about Christ in the church, saints are not talked about at all, which kind of, in speaking with you now, it seems kind of absurd. I mean,
well, it tells you
these
something.
are stories that can be used. I mean, to bring people to Christ.
These are stories to be used to bring you to Christ as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I will tell you that nothing has brought me closer to Christ and helped me to understand what a Christian is more than reading the lives of the saints every day. Nothing. Nothing. And especially the modern saints, right? Read about Go now. Maybe you don't call them saints. You're non-denominational Christian. The listeners out there who are like, that's saint stuff. Okay, don't call them saints. Don't call them saints. Just go and read about the new martyrs of Russia. Go and read about these clerics who were tortured and executed, and standing about to be executed said, "Glory to God for all things," before the bullet went into their skull. And then ask yourself, is that my faith? Is my faith that strong? Is my faith that strong? And then you should ask yourself, like, ooh, how did their faith get that strong? Wait, what is their relationship with Christ like? And then ask yourself, like, ooh, how did they get that relationship with Christ? Can I have that relationship with Christ? And the answer is yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, some people might be scared hearing that. It's kind of strange to say, but if you don't have the perspective of Christ's peace in your life.
Well, what is this? You're supposed to be scared. What is that?
Yeah.
That's an instrument of torture.
Yeah.
That's an instrument. Some people
Cyprian,
might be scared.
Cyprian's holding up his cross, his necklace.
What do you think it means to be a Christian?
Yeah.
Like, you want to imitate Christ.
Mm-hmm.
How did his life end?
Yeah.
And it's like the peace is that you can go to the cross in peace. The peace is not that you don't go to the cross. The Christian life is an orientation towards the cross. What do we look at when we go to church? What are we facing? What are we looking at? What are we oriented toward? Mm-hmm. That what you're oriented toward, when you move forward in life, that is what you reach. So it's like, if you're not scared, that's the fear of God. If you're not scared, are you a Christian? Do you understand what you've signed up for? This is what it means to be Christian. And if you're unwilling to be Christian, he said, take up your cross and follow me. Our Lord said, take up your cross and follow me. Right? He said, take up the instrument of your death, of your martyrdom, and follow me, because that's where I'm going. I'm going over there. Follow me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means to be a Christian. And if we're willing to live that way, the world can be beautiful. And if we're unwilling to live that way, then the world will be hell, guaranteed. That's how we get to where we are now. Because we're unwilling to take up our cross. We're unwilling to say, no, I will not. That's how we got here. Close the churches. Put on a mask. No more liturgies. Okay, well, the world is going to be hell. Don't trust that he who heals can heal this situation. Trust the science. Man. Unless you say, no, I will not, then the world will be hell.
Yeah, it just like you talked about at the beginning, the next thing will be in the church, and we're not going to trust God to heal the world we live in, to keep it so it doesn't become a barren wasteland.
Yeah, this is where we have to have faith if we are going to. Well, as the psalmist says, put not your trust in princes and sons of men in whom there is no salvation.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's it. Like, we're being told there's no salvation in these men. And time and time and time again, those who are like, do not trust the church, do not trust in Christ, look at the hell on earth that they've created. Over and over and over again.
Yeah.
but you wouldn't know that unless you were reading the lives of the saints. You wouldn't know that unless you actually knew what it meant to be a Christian. And not in the ancient past, like in the last 100 years, in the living memory of people on earth today.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, Vin, Cyprian, this has been a great conversation, man. And my hope and my prayer is that this has reached someone today. Hopefully, it has. And then also hopefully with what we talked about, with what you talked about for most of the show, with what's happening with the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Prayers with them, and we'll see where that goes, because a lot of uncertainty there. But like we've talked about. I think
one thing people pay attention, right? Like pay attention to that part of the story. A lot of people want to pay attention to the battles and all that type of stuff, but it's like let's pay attention to that part of the story, because that's what this is ultimately really all about.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important for us to put our attention on it. That's a big help in all of this.
Amen to that. Thank you for the time today. Just if you have anything to plug or anything you want to let my audience know about, have at it.
Well, if any of the ideas here about orthodoxy or anything like that is interesting to people, I do a weekly podcast with my spiritual father, Father Turbo Qualls, and also a fellow brother in Christ, Andrew Funk. A lot of people really like it, regardless of even if you're not a Christian. Just the spiritual principles that are in there. It's been, for me, it's been an education. It's really brought my faith, it's brought me way closer to Christ in the basically year that we've been doing it. You can find it, just search The Royal Path on YouTube. It's also on Spotify and on Odyssey. You can find it as well. And I think people will really enjoy it. If you want basically a kind of a primer on Orthodoxy and the ancient faith, start at the first episodes. We kind of go through, and it's almost an Orthodox catechism. So that's pretty cool too, if you just want to see what that faith is about. So that's The Royal Path. You can YouTube, Odyssey, and Spotify. You can find it.
All right. Thank you for coming on the show, and soon.
Thanks, John.